Hey guys, welcome back to the TARDIS. I got a lot done today. I got the Mercury Redstone. I got those tape coverings, that skin put on it. And if I hadn't already put the fins on it, I probably could have got the bottom section a little straighter. But the nice thing is that although those things have an incredible amount of tack on them, they actually can, if you're really careful, you haven't stuck the whole thing on there, you can peel it off and get it back on. They come with very detailed instructions. You have to paint it in gloss paint, which I already had, so I had that out of the way. I was able just to go straight to decaling it. I think it looks great. This is, of course, I've told you guys, is my favorite rocket, just aesthetically. The red, the black, the white, the symmetry of the rocket, and it also has little decals. This is MR8, which is Gus Grissom ship, but if you want to make it MR7, have little over stickers there. There's a lot of things you can do with this to gussy it up even more if you want to. I'm not going to. This is supposed to be a flyer, and this is wonderful. If this thing survives the few launches, I'm sure it's going to go on display, and I can't thank you for that. Thank you, Paul. That was just wonderful. I'm really happy with this, and if I ever get another one, I'll probably do a real slow display job on it. Might still fly. I also got the Gundam that Eduardo got me. I got the character basically done, a couple of his weapons, but I'll have to put a bunch of the others together. I actually took these inside and did them at my computer station today instead of out here in the TARDIS because I wanted to watch YouTube videos, catch up on my viewing while I was doing it. And I want to give a couple of shout outs. First off to Havoc Sun, thank you for the shout out. I'm going to attach a link to a video. Havoc Sun was doing a video on building some of the old Intex pocket kits. It's worth a watch. It's about 7.5 minutes, and he gets into it. And I remember those Intex kits. He gives a pretty decent little history on the company and everything. And of course, for those who are interested, I did cover Intex in one of my videos. If I can find the link, I'll stick it below. But I appreciate the shout out, and that was a nice little video. And one of the viewers of the show, Mark up in Montana, has been doing a lot of the old Aurora kits, or World War I kits. You see a lot of them in the viewers builds, and he did most of those little Aurora kits, and he does a real nice job on them. Well, when I saw that, it got me curious. When I saw those Intex kits, I was like, I don't think those are old Aurora molds, because Aurora, pretty much, except for parceling a few out on leases like the Mr. Spock that they leased out to NPC. And yeah, that's right. The Mr. Spock, the phaser and three-headed snake, I found out that was originally an Aurora mold that they leased to NPC. But anyway, so I knew they didn't, generally speaking, lease out their stuff, but I also knew that Monogram the one thing that Monogram wanted from the Aurora molds were their World War I aircraft. And so I went and looked up, and according to Scalemates, the Intex molds are actually the old Marusan molds, and of course Marusan, those changed hands numerous times. Eldon, Fuji, oh gosh, I lose track. Intex was just one of them. I think they finally ended up at Ertl, and I think the last time they were produced was the 90s. The molds have gotten pretty old. He actually points that out, that one of them looks pretty crisp, probably a fresher mold, and one of them the Albatross is pretty rough, so probably a worn out mold, because that makes sense because the Albatross is such a popular airplane, probably one of the best looking planes of the First World War. And so had a pretty productive day, and maybe tomorrow I might get something out in the morning, but we have real world stuff that we got to do most of the day, so I don't know if I'll get anything out tomorrow or not, but unfortunately I don't know if I'll get a chance to do any building. Next step is to get on the wagon, and I know I said earlier I might do the two Gundams side by side, but I realized that I was asking too much. Now that brings up a point I wanted to talk about the Gundam kits. Bandai, in my humble opinion, and it's worth everything you're paying for it, I think the way they laid out the Gundam kits, they may arguably be the best thought out and laid out and engineered models, kit models I've ever dealt with. The fact that you, generally speaking, don't have to use glue. I did accidentally cut off one piece that I wasn't supposed to, so I did have to glue one little ankle cover on, but that's knocks nicks. But the fact that it's the A sprue, the B sprue, the C sprue, and the weapons are on, like, everything is so well labeled and laid out. Although some of the diagrams, because of the extremely complex shapes, they can get a little confusing. But generally speaking, you got to take your time, step by step. But like with any kit. But this is only my second one, and I had no real problems with building the first one. And this one went, of course, with that little bit of experience, this one went together even better. I laid everything out, ABC, right there in front of me, in front of the computer. Now, one of the things I like about this is that I was able to watch my YouTube videos and do this thing. And since I didn't have to worry about really painting it or pre-painting anything, that made it a lot easier. Now, I did feed a couple of parts of the carpet monster, but the styrene gods were, feeling kind today, so I found them without any trouble. And I have to admit, it was a nice thing to work on, to do something different while I was watching my computer videos. You have to watch what you're doing. I was watching Greg's Airplanes and Automobiles, which most of you guys are familiar with, and today he was getting into the one I was watching, which he did a few months ago, is in the technical minutia about the drop tanks. And I mean, I thought I knew a lot about airplanes. This guy really does his research. In fact, I would say that Greg's Airplanes and Automobiles is to World War II aviation what the Chieftain is to World War II armor. If you guys are familiar with Nick Moran, the Chieftain does the armor videos. Not on models, although he does build model tanks, and his little set in his house has model tanks, and he has actually done a couple of videos on building, I think he was building a Tamiya Hago tank, a little Japanese tank. So he's one of us. But I think I had heard about this before, but he pretty much called it the way it was. For those of you, who are into World War II aviation, I think I'm about to rock your world. But really, Greg is the one who's rocking the world. I'm just proselytizing the message. Now, we all know that the standard historical belief, or it's basically accepted as fact at this point, is that American fighters could not escort American bombers all the way to Berlin or deep into Germany until they got the P-51 Mustang. And apparently, that just ain't entirely true. And apparently, there were drop tanks and external and internal fuel arrangements on the earlier model Thunderbolts that would have given them coverage to a lot of targets in Germany, and probably within 50 miles, I think it was Schweinfurt. And he gets into why this didn't happen, and how the bomber mafia was running the Air Force back then. They didn't want to escort fighters, and it turned out they were going to need them. He's very candid about it. Generals had careers to protect, and they never lied to Congress. They were just very careful about how they presented the information to make it look like the Mustang was the only plane that could make deep penetrations into Germany. And he talks about things I didn't even know, because I didn't know there was a 300 to 310 gallon wing-mounted drop tanks would have given a Thunderbolt up to an extra 600 gallons of fuel. I mean, that would have greatly extended the range. And I didn't know that Republic had made a big conformal belly tank. That it just he's got the photos and all the documentation, and he explains how they went about explaining to Congress why they did what they did, and he's not shy about it. And but he's not. It's not like he's up there being all emotional. For those who haven't seen it, he gives a very monotone, dry delivery, very factual. He's kind of like me in that he's conversational. He's just talking to you, not at you. But anyway, I was kind of gobsmacked by that, because I knew the Thunderbolt was capable of longer range than it was normally used for. I had no idea that they had some of the capacities that they had, and some of it did get used a little bit in the Pacific. He talks about that too. He does very thorough coverage, and sadly, nothing he said really strikes me as odd. I can completely see this happening. but was what it was. But I appreciate that he's trying to set the record straight, and he's got an uphill battle if he's going to dispel that myth that, you know, the Mustang was the only plane that could go into Germany. So I'll put a link below, and if you guys want to watch it, it's a pretty long video, but it's a long story. So that being said, again, I want to thank you guys for everything. I did do a little more reading on the GB, and yes, it is true. Billy, in the book, Doolittle did say it was the most dangerous airplane he ever flew. And he only had a couple of flights in it before he raced it. But he knew something, and he took it up to like 4,000 or 5,000 feet and played with it before he, you know, got down low. And he realized he tried to do pylon turns in that thing. He said you just breathe on that control stick, and it was a very twitchy airplane. I don't know if when Delmar Benjamin made his replica of it, if he made any aerodynamic improvements. I'm sure he used better materials and probably had a, you know, probably was a bit safer airplane, at least better brakes and everything. But that aside, I'm sure the airplane was still quite the handful. And Doolittle said point blank, you did not take your hand off the control or your eye off that airplane for a second. It was total focus. Or in other words, like flying a helicopter. I flew a Robinson one time, and I rode in helicopters a lot in the Army. The only time I actually flew one was a quick orientation ride in a Robbie, and you know, I took the controls, and it has such light controls, and you don't even move your hand, you just pulse your fist like that, and that's all. It just everything. It's all on the wrist. A very easy aircraft to over control, and yes, you can destroy a helicopter just by jerking the stick back and forth. So the GB was a kind of airplane that you know, one false move and it would bite you. But my God, that thing would move. You know, in those days, you look at Turner's Meteor and the Waddell Williams and the Laird Super Solution and all these racers of the air, which a lot of you guys like myself have built models of because Hawk made those cool kits back in the day. I didn't have enough respect for them back then. But, well, we were kids. But those airplanes, man, the philosophy of the day was as much engine and as little airplane, and the faster you go. And some airplanes like Ike and some of the others had relatively small inline engines, but tiny little cross-section, stubby little wings. They didn't have that much power, but they set some records too. And a lot of the Cauldrons were designed that way, the French airplanes. And, well, actually, that's, I guess, the way a lot of fighters were designed. Which is kind of funny, because you look at an airplane like the Spitfire and its stablemate, the Hurricane. When you look at the Hurricane, you see this big slab wing, this wide track gear. It uses a lot of the traditional construction techniques of wood and fabric, as well as aluminum and steel. And it's been pointed out many times, and I think accurately so, that the Hurricane was the Royal Air Force's first-rate monoplane fighter, and they wanted to go conservative with it. They didn't want to make a super twitchy airplane. So they made a good, solid, competent airplane that had a lot of forgiving characteristics to cut their teeth on. Of course, a lot of folks, you probably already know that they had about 4 times as many Hurricanes as they did Spitfires during the Battle of Britain. And it was an important airplane throughout most of the war, not only because they had so many of them, but it could still do a good job. You had your hands full if you wanted to tangle with a 109. The 109 had all the advantages if it was an even, fights-on kind of match. But you were too slow to run away and really weren't maneuverable enough to out-turn it unless you had a really hot stick and maybe a not-so-hot Messerschmitt pilot. Whereas a Spitfire, everybody knows it was pretty much an even fight. Of course, we also know that the battles of World War II were not about, meeting on the field of honor and saluting each other and, fights on. And the World War II was, get behind him, don't let him see you, and murder him from behind. It's a knife fight in a phone booth. And a Hurricane could slip in behind and shoot down a Messerschmitt as well as any other airplane. Maybe a little trouble catching it, but they raised heck with the bombers. But then, of course, the RAF knew they needed a better fighter even before the war broke out, and the Hurricane had shown that, hey, this is a viable concept, this is the future. So, of course, R.J. Mitchell came up with the excellent Spitfire. Although there's really not that much time between the two of them. They were almost developed contemporaneously. But I think it was Sidney Cam, I believe it was the designer on the Hurricane, and he knew what the RAF wanted, and he gave them what they wanted, and one could argue what they needed. And you look at the first American monoplane fighters, you know, they weren't any great shakes. I mean, for their time, you know, the P-26, and then you get into the P-36 Hawks and stuff, and they were all, you know, the Severskys. For their day, they were good, but they were outclassed so quickly. But then, of course, aviation was just going in leaps and bounds. Now, what I always found interesting is that aviation technology was just springing forward, but automobile technology and armor technology were not. And what's kind of odd is that you look at the cars of the 30s and 40s and the military vehicles, and they were all basically essentially the same technology. If you could work on the family car, you could probably work on a tank, which had a lot of advantages. We had one of the most mechanically apt militaries. One of the reasons that we had a lot of advantage over the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese is that if a piece of machinery broke down, most likely you had somebody in the company, probably a couple of guys who could get it running again. Whereas in Germany or in Japan, you actually had to go get a qualified mechanic. But I always find it interesting that airplanes were just, you know, the jet engines, the swept wing technology. I mean, look what they did in 10 years. Heck, we went from the Wright brothers to the moon in what, 66 years? Which is, of course, one of the reasons it's a modeler's paradise, because so much cool stuff to make. But the cars, other than styling, they really didn't advance all that much. And maybe I don't know, maybe they didn't have room to advance. I mean, you can only go so fast on a highway. And tire technology was tire and brake technology were two of the really big improvements in automobiles. I mean, the development of power steering and the disc brake, the seat belt and the airbag probably saved more people than anything else. But, and aircraft, you know, aircraft have hit their limit too. Right now, you think about it, a car today doesn't go any faster than a souped up car from the 50s or a race car from the 30s. Jets today don't go any faster than they did in the 50s. I mean, commercial aircraft, even military aircraft really aren't any hotter. I mean, the SR-70, the fastest thing we ever, the SR-71, the fastest plane we ever had, you know, there's nothing that can touch it, well, at least that we know of. The Concorde, so there's a thing called the asymptote where, you know, there's this great rapid climb and then it curves off the top, and when you're under that top where it peels off to gradual improvement, that's the asymptote, and that's where we've been since the 70s. But I think what happened was cars hit the technological wall a lot quicker than airplanes did. But once airplanes hit it, and then everything became about, the new standard was, okay, let's make it about fuel efficiency and noise reduction, which are very important advancements. But we're not going any faster, although we're doing it a lot cheaper and a lot cleaner. Value, to be sure. But we couldn't put a man on the moon now if we tried, so... What happened? Why are we golfing on Mars? Anyway, well, that's the end of my little rant. So, guys, hope you're having a wonderful evening, and hopefully I get a chance to see you tomorrow. I'm hoping possibly this Saturday to get to do another live stream, and maybe I can have a few of these models finished. And, well, that's about it. You guys have a great day. We'll talk to you later, and model on.